New York's Bronx Zoo is famous for so many things, and one of them is their ability to design some of the most natural-looking man-made habitats you'll ever see. They could be decades to nearly a century old, multiple acres, or some really small spaces. No place in the nation does this better than them. And you could argue that the best example of this can be found at the Congo Gorilla Forest. In this video, I'll be walking us through a 6.5 acre slice of the densest, darkest parts of the African forest. Since 1999, the Congo Gorilla Forest still holds a standard that still very few zoos around the world have lived up to. The immersion, the education, and even way before this video's end, you'll see why the zoo calls this their most ambitious project to date, why the attraction rightfully received so many awards, and even why the most casual visitor will call this the best zoo exhibit in the nation. Before we begin though, I would really appreciate it if you press those like and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Then I need all of you to get the comments going below with this one simple question. Personally, what is objectively the best zoo exhibit you have ever seen? There is one catch, or several catches, to the Bronx Zoo. If one of their exhibits is labeled as a star attraction, that means it requires additional admission, which is $7 per attraction per person as of 2024. Unless you go with the full experience ticket package, which in that case, you get access to all of these star attractions, and the Congo Gorilla Forest is one of them. I know a lot of my videos lately have been fast-paced, but with an exhibit like this, it deserves every little detail to be shown off. And I'll start with the ground that we're walking on, to make it look more like dirt without actually being dirt. The outdoor path is made of rubber mulch that you normally find in playgrounds. It adds to the immersion, and it's also kind of bouncy. Of the Congo's larger habitats, this is really the only one that makes it obvious that you're looking at a zoo exhibit. But that doesn't take away that it's still a great home for Angolan Colobus monkeys, one of 61 species of leaf monkeys. They feast on fruits, flowers, and if you couldn't possibly guess, as many leaves as they can eat. Up to 7 pounds of it in one day, and thanks to their several chambered stomach, they can even break down veggies that are too toxic for other monkeys to eat. To get the forest blooming, the team planted over 14,000 plants from 400 species, a lot of which never previously grew in the New York area. My favorite plant in the Congo isn't even real at all. The path passes you through a hollowed out fallen ceiba tree, and like a real deteriorating tree, it's filled with breaks in the wood. This wasn't just designed for realism, they were strategically placed to reveal bioluminescent fungi and giant millipedes in the past. It acts as a barrier between you and a very mysterious creature that we'll get to in a bit. The Congo shines light on species that you won't even find in the exhibit, almost as much as species that you would find. While you're walking between habitats, hundreds of graphics are scattered along the rest of the way to keep you occupied. Poop. There's a poop display because even dung can tell a story. You can find out the different width of an elephant's footprint. Small prints from a single individual can indicate that a calf might be all alone. Prints of all sizes reveal the family has stuck together, and massive individual tracks will tell us that a bull is on his lonesome, which is actually normal. If you see a tree that looks like it's seen better days, well, that was just an elephant's way of getting some nutrients onto its tusks. And if you see the African civet, let me know where it is because I've yet to come across a statue that was this good at hiding. Speaking of hiding, and rarely seen in the wild, the tracks on the trail hint at what you can find next in the jungle, the Okapi. I've seen this species so many times, I'm this close to considering them a common zoo animal, but it's always amazing to overhear visitors be so fascinated by one of nature's greatest compositions. This is the only living relative of the giraffe. And giraffes patrol the savannas in herds more often than not, and aren't too concerned with declaring their own territories. Okapis hide in the deepest, densest forest of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Naturally, they prefer their alone time and will mark a territory by rubbing their necks on trees. Males will spray urine, females will defecate, and both have scent glands on each foot that leaves behind a sticky tar-like substance wherever they walk. This is a big reason why the Congo Gorilla Forest is a standard African forest attraction, because it's so lush. To the naked eye, the enclosure doesn't look like an enclosure at all. From all directions, the backdrop, sides, and even from the guest side, this is about as barrierless as an exhibit can look. The next habitat doesn't look too bad of looking barrierless itself, but once again, it's something I'll save for later, and I promise that will be the last time I do that. I've seen a lot of African forest exhibits in my day, and it will always be one of my favorite themes. But a lot of them do have the same animals. The Bronx zoos is no exception. But they do have the living treasures of the Congo Gallery. Nearly 30 medium to bite-sized species and 18 aquaria and terraria in an organized square surrounding a central open-topped cichlid and Tetra tank. It definitely gives off the vibe of a museum more than a zoo exhibit. The signage is way more complex, impactful, hands-on, and they ask the important questions in life, like, how can you tell when an insect is poisonous? What's giving the Lake Victoria cichlids a tough time? And why are so many frogs disappearing? The world may never know. If you're having trouble seeing the freshwater butterflyfish, you can press a button and you're asked to pretend to be a hungry heron and count as many of them as you can find. There were 5 kinds of creepy crawlers, 12 freshwater swimmers, and I spent as long as I could with the spotted lungfish. Most fish would be left high and dry during a drought. When water disappears, lungfish will tunnel underground, encasing themselves in this kind of cocoon of mucus, retaining moisture but still allowing just enough room for them to breathe the same air that we do. No deep water required, and they can stay this way for nearly 5 years. For the reptile fanatics, the Congo has several pythons, turtles, and a Nile monitor, more than 5 feet long, 15 pounds. This is Africa's largest lizard. That tail is a counterweight when they run, a powerful oar when they swim, and a whip for self-defense. They're known for their size as much as they are for their intelligence. Apparently, pairs have been observed working together to steal crocodile eggs. One of them will perform a distraction while the other will start raiding the nest. In the dark, eerie, and totally inviting corner, it's impossible to miss the African rock python. Africa's largest lizard meet Africa's largest snake. They'll bask in the sun, but are mostly on the move and on the hunt at night. They'll swallow something as small as a mouse to a bird, to something as large as a monkey and even antelope. If you ever wanted to know what you look like from a python's perspective, call me out if I'm wrong, but I'm 99% sure that screen is projected through a Pepper's Ghost effect, and it gives you an idea of what the snake sees when it's watching you. They have very special sensing organs that convert the heat from organisms that are warmer into electrical signals, which is how they are able to detect prey so well in the dark. Remaining inside, the Living Treasures Gallery opens into the first of 3 displays in the interconnected forest. It mixes 2 mammals that are the most colorful of their kinds. Red river hogs don't live in a red river. They're named after their reddish-brown fur that matches the mud that they wallow in, and I hear predators don't see red too well. Like nearly any pig, they are social. As a tour group, we've seen red river hogs mixed with gorillas, but not mandrills. The two unintentionally work together to keep the forest healthy. Mandrills will forage for roots, fruits, seeds, and sometimes these seeds will go undigested, and other times they'll just drop them on the floor. And hogs have been observed following primates and even forest elephants around in the wild for this exact reason. They'll eat the fallen fruit and harder to chew on seeds and replenish the forest with new growth. I think the exhibit works because of the never-ending forest. Animals that you wouldn't expect to get along at least mind their own business. And, glass viewing in general is cool. But putting animals at your feet can get kind of boring. But when they're waist high, now that's how you can make a connection and a really good way to get people to interact with the signage. At the turn, the outdoors sort of looks like it blends in with the next all-indoor display. But it's also so detailed. For just a split second, this does kind of look like it's outside. Look high in the sky for the Congo Basin wolf's guenon. What's a guenon? If you guessed monkey, you'd be right. There's at least 36 species of guenons in Africa, and the zoo asks the question, why are there so many different kinds so close to each other? According to them, over 5 million years ago, there was only one species of guenon in one really large forest in Central Africa. As the climate changed, some patches of this forest were replaced with savannas. With this guenon now isolated in several pockets, each population evolved into a different species. Now, this display actually talks about seed dispersal cooperation between primates and red river hogs, which leads you to lift this fig to find out what's 200 feet tall and kills trees. It's referring to a strangler fig, which is a tree itself that sort of grows in reverse. It starts the first part of its life usually on the branch of another tree. It will then send its roots down to the ground and eventually enveloping or strangling its tree host, more often than not, to death. Once again, we have another gorgeous display. Naturally lit, blends flawlessly with the guenon space. It's so well planted, it's hard to tell where it ends. And it even has a theme with a few hidden Easter eggs related to how different birds nest. And I never expected that this is where I would have the channel's first featured pangolin. Hopefully next time I'll use my own footage one day. In case you were concerned, the zoo did not forget about the birds. African pygmy geese have very stubby beaks, much like, of course, a goose. But it's actually a very small kind of perching duck. Some animals will follow monkeys around to get leftover fruits and seeds. Long-tailed hornbills follow them to snag any scurried small animals. Going back to the Okapi, it's probably the most famous example of a Congo species being discovered by scientists relatively late in the game. But scientists also found a single feather from a Congo peafowl in 1913 and wasn't officially classified as a species until 1936. And even to this day, they are still very difficult to study in the wild. That brings us to the Conservation Showcase Gallery. It's fairly similar to the Treasures Gallery. It doesn't have any live animals, but it does have a lot of button pressing, and the room's message can be pretty impactful if you take your time to look around. It quite literally shines a light on African artwork, tools and methods used to study animals in the wild, protected areas in the Congo where wildlife like gorillas and elephants refuge. You'll learn about presumably real people and their stories of what inspired them to want to protect the forest. But everything that this gallery represents is symbolized by a tree that's been cut and the culprit's tool that did this. If you want to feel inspired even more and you're up for a short wait, the gallery does feature the Conservation Theater and an 8-minute shot-on-location presentation demonstrating the zoo's and the Wildlife Conservation Society's strategies to protect these animals. In true theatrical fashion, once the film concludes, the screen rises, the curtains are moved aside, and the exit opens to the Great Apes Gallery, a doorway to one of the best man-made habitats on the planet. I could be quiet and let the exhibit speak for itself, but I'm not going to do that. As much as we'd like to pretend that this is the real deal, this is a true, lush, tropical rainforest year-round. We all know that New York can get pretty cold. I can't speak for the rest of the attraction's animals, but I know you can still see the gorillas in an all-indoor display, but only in certain parts of the year, when it's consistently warm outside and they are guaranteed outdoor access. Their indoor area is hidden, and because it was hidden, obviously I didn't see it. So I'm sorry if I'm wrong. Supposedly the access is somewhere in the hallway to the Conservation Showcase. At one point, the Bronx Zoo was home to 23 individuals, so at one point it had, and honestly it still could have, the largest gorilla population in America. I've been to several zoos with these kinds of numbers, but most of the time they're divided into multiple groups. So it was a totally different experience watching so many of them living together in one place. The zoo's history with gorillas dates back more than half a century ago. The Wildlife Conservation Society, formerly known as the New York Zoological Society, founded in 1895. In short, it's an organization that manages the Central Park Zoo, New York Aquarium, Prospect Park Zoo, Queens Zoo, and manages and is headquartered at the Bronx Zoo. The society heavily promotes the study of zoology and runs quite a few conservation programs in more than 50 countries. In 1959, a conservationist from the society launched one of the first ever studies of wild gorillas, which later debunked the myth that gorillas are naturally dangerous, aggressive creatures. Nearly 60 years later, the WCS led the most comprehensive survey of lowland gorillas and chimpanzees in history. And the society proudly claims to be the only organization working to protect all 4 kinds of gorillas in the wild. If you thought this was the grand finale, I wouldn't blame you because you're not entirely wrong. Once you've had your time with the apes, you can turn around and learn more on what it means to be a primate. Compare your handprint to a gorilla's, and a human skull's to a gorilla's skull's, and a pygmy marmoset's. Every marmoset is on the smaller side, but pygmy marmosets weigh about 2 to 5 ounces and max out around a foot long, including the tail. So within this same room, you can see the world's largest primate species, if you don't want to be technical, and the world's smallest monkey. They do live in South America, so it really doesn't make sense geographically for them to be here, but really this is the only way that you'll see this comparison. When you're heading out of the Great Apes Rotunda, you'll enter the Gorilla Encounter Tunnel, putting you through the larger right-sided habitat. There's apes directly on your left, on your right, at your waist, by your feet, and even right above you. Once you finally reach fresh air and get a glimpse of the gorillas through that same habitat, that might be all for you for the main trail, but there's still just one more thing I need to show you. Let's say you didn't feel like paying the entry fee or the full experience package ticket, which you definitely should. You can still see a very tiny part of the exhibit without walking through the main parts of the exhibit. To the right of the Congo's main entrance is the Forest Edge View. There's a map of the WCS's field sites in Central Africa. A map that shows you what you could be missing out if you don't go through the trail, and the last viewing spot on this episode gives you a look into the back end of the larger gorilla habitat. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was my presentation of the Congo Gorilla Forest. The research, the care, and the overall thought process that went into every aspect of this exhibit is truly inspiring. This is now decades old, and I cannot think of any zoo exhibit in the country that comes this close to this level of ambition and creativity. It's without a doubt the best Congo exhibit in the nation, has some of the best habitats you will ever see, and for decades to come, it will still be referred to as one of the best zoological accomplishments in the world. As usual, whether or not you've seen it in person, please let me know your thoughts on the Congo Gorilla Forest below.